Alright, in this video, I wanted to give you a little tidbit about the rapture. I've made plenty of videos talking about the post, mid, and pre-trib rapture, and I'm very well convinced of a pre-time of Jacob's trouble rapture, before this 7 years of trouble actually begins, not in the middle of it, not at the end of it. None of those views make sense. Such as the post doesn't make sense, having to deal with you're saved by grace through faith, but if you take the mark of the beast, you're damned with no hope of salvation. So you can't have those two conflicting gospels going out at the same time. We're in the time of grace where you can be saved by grace through faith, but during this time, if you take the mark of the beast, you're damned. You're not saved by grace through faith during the tribulation. So post-trib doesn't make any sense. Especially when Jesus returns with all his saints, lands on the Mount of Olives in Revelation 19, and then it talks about in Revelation 20 a resurrection. And everyone says that this is the first resurrection, so this has to be when the rapture happens, because the dead rise first, then those who are alive and remain. And I'm about to show you how that's not how it goes, especially since there's people who are obviously resurrected before the first resurrection, and people who have been taken before the first resurrection, like Enoch and Elijah, for example. Jesus himself was both resurrected and raptured, right? All before Revelation 20. The mid-trib doesn't make any sense either, because again, you have to deal with the mark of the beast. I know they like to say it's post-trib, pre-wrath. No. You see, the dispensation changed because the whole 7 years is dealing with Israel, the Hebrews, the Jews, not the church. And that's just briefly covering how that doesn't make any sense. But before I get into a passage real quick, I actually wanted to point out how Ricardo Garcia, if you haven't checked out his videos, check his videos out. He does a lot of videos in Portuguese and in English. So you'll have to check the videos to make sure they're in a language you can actually understand. But he does a really good job using the scriptures and prophecy and using the sun, moon, and stars to calculate the times. And he has come to the same conclusion that I came to, is that this past month that went by, the sun is still in Virgo, so it's not the time for the Feast of Trumpets, Atonement, and Tabernacles. That's not until the next month, where the sun finally moves into the constellation of the scales of judgment. Because it's not just about the moon going through its phases, and when you see the new moon, boom, that's the next month. And boom, that's the 7th month that showed up. No, it also has to line up with the sun. That's why the Jews, with their traditions, always end up being a month off every couple of years or so, because they don't follow the sun, they just follow the moon, instead of using the sun and the moon. And he's come to that same conclusion, so he hasn't been caught up in all this hype about, oh, we missed trumpets, we missed atonement, now we're looking at tabernacles. And I've even saw some interesting things about people saying that the fall feasts are going to be actually fulfilled backwards. So at the end of tabernacles would be when that feast is actually going to start, and then atonement, and then trumpets. So within 3 years, I guess. So this year, they're saying, oh, at the end of tabernacles, then I guess next year at atonement, that's fulfilled, and then the next year at the end of trumpets. Seems a little weird. Doesn't make sense. One of their arguments was that Jesus fulfilled the spring feast all in a row in the same year. But the issue is that you can't fulfill the fall feast in a row in the same year if you start at the last feast. because the other two feasts come before it. You can't go backwards in time. So, it just doesn't line up with their way of thinking. But I wanted to point out the things people come up with to try to say, hey, this is the month. But they're a whole month early. We're still in a second month of Elul, where the sun is still in the constellation of Virgo, giving us another month of repentance to get ready. And I'm pretty sure once Tabernacles passes, you're going to have Burial and God a Minute and End Time Dream and Vision, Bob Barber there, and others popping up saying, oh, we were a month off. And they're going to start the whole thing over again. And I don't know why, but that's what they're going to do. If they've even caught on that they're a month off. But anyway, over here in John 11 is something I want to read to basically be the foundation for what I was saying in this video, and to just give you a tidbit and wrap up the video. In John chapter 11, we have the introduction to Lazarus, and Lazarus actually getting sick and dying. And Jesus takes his time to go visit him because he knows he's going to die, but it's for the glory of God so that he can raise him from the dead. And when he's coming to his sisters here, over here in verse 23 is where I want to start. It says, Jesus saith unto her, Thy brother shall rise again. Martha saith unto him, I know that he shall rise again in the resurrection at the last day. So you see, this is where a lot of people are saying, yeah, see, it's the first resurrection in Revelation 20. That's when the church will be raised. That's when the rapture is. Or they'll say, oh, this is at the mid-trib. And they'll justify it in a similar way. Right? But check out what Jesus says. Verse 25 says, Jesus said unto her, I am the resurrection and the life. He that believeth in me, though he were dead, yet shall he live. And whosoever liveth and believeth in me shall never die. Believeth thou this? Now this is exactly the same language that Paul used talking about the rapture. Saying, hey, those that are asleep, those that are dead, they believe on Jesus, they're going to be resurrected first. Then those of us who believe that are alive and remain will be caught up with them. So here Jesus is telling them, no, before the resurrection of the last day, there's a resurrection, and those that live, they'll never end up dying. Right? This is talking about the rapture. I believe he even mentions it again in John 14, I believe it is, where he says he's going to go. I might as well bring it up. But before I do, I wanted to check out something. If he was mentioning a feast at this time, it was actually, I think, the chapter before where it mentions the feast of Hanukkah. So this is actually after Hanukkah and before the next Passover. If I'm getting the context correct by memory here. I would have to go back to the next chapter to realize that. Or to be sure on that, I should say. But coming over to John 14, if I got this correct. Yes, right here, verses 1 through 4. Another little tidbit here. Jesus says, let not your heart be troubled. Just like Paul says about the rapture, right? He's like, if anybody writes a letter from me or anybody else, don't be troubled by it, right? It says, ye believe in God, believe also in me. In my Father's house are many mansions. So it's not here on earth, it's at the Father's house, right? If it were not so, I would have told you. I go to prepare a place for you. Where? At the Father's house. Yet if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and receive you unto myself, that where I am, there ye may be also. And whither I go, ye know, and the way ye know. This is again a reference to the rapture, showing again this is not a post-trib rapture, because at the end of the tribulation, Jesus comes, lands at the Mount of Olives, enters into Jerusalem from the east gate there, and establishes his kingdom for 1,000 years. So if he raptures us right then, We're not caught up into the clouds with him because he's here on the earth, and we're not going to where he is, making that place in the house of God, right? So that post-trib definitely doesn't make any sense. But if you believe in the mid-trib, I guess you can try to warp this into trying to fit that, other than the whole time is about the time of Jacob's trouble, not the church's trouble, right? But anyway, I just wanted to show a little bit of tidbit here that Jesus is going. He's preparing a place to come take us there. So that definitely leaves out a post-trib, right? And if you believe in some form of a mid-trib, you could try to squeeze that in there. But through everything else I've shown, that's just ridiculous. Again, dealing with the mark of the beast and a time of grace doesn't make sense. Those two ideologies don't mix, just like you can't have the law and grace at the same time. It's one or the other. So, with that being said, we see that people were saying, oh, the resurrection's at the last day. And God shows, no, you see, there's going to be a resurrection before then. So people say, oh, it's like hidden. Well, it's kind of right there in your front of your face. You just kind of overlook it every time you read it and see it. So with that being said, when is the rapture? Before the time of Jacob's trouble. It actually looks like next month. From when I'm putting this, it's about a week. The new moon should be around the 2nd of November. And that is the actual start of the Feast of Trumpets. And that's a pretty good time for the rapture to actually happen. It's when I think it would happen, if it's going to happen this year. But people make good arguments for it to happen at the Feast of Atonement or at the Feast of Tabernacles. It could be on one of those times. I'm not quite sold on that, but I can be wrong. I'm not infallible. Matter of fact, it could be any day. It could be right now. Right? As far as I know. This is just a hypothesis, not a thus saith the Lord. So all the people upset about, setting dates, you cry about it, okay? I can speculate all I want. All right, I'm not saying this is going to happen, but I think it is. And I can think that if I want. But again, with all that being said, thanks for watching. Take care.